Hello, I'm Kristen Morris, educator, graphic designer, and educational technologist. Today I'm going to take a few minutes to give you the condensed basics about designing effective graphics for learning using contrast, alignment, repetition, proximity, and extra space. To avoid confusing the learner, your job as a designer is to point out to learners what is important for them to look at. Secondly, your job has to do with helping organize these new ideas into smaller chunks, about 7 of them. So, how do you do this? Contrast, alignment, repetition, proximity, and extra space are your best friends when designing for learning. You'll want to remember this phrase, CARPE Idiom. It means seize the idiom, or language of designing for learning. The word carpe, which means to seize in Latin, is just the mnemonic we need to remember the organizing principles, how to organize the elements of effective design for learning. I'm going to show you how the carpe idiom works in some before and after examples. Designing is the act of creating cues to direct the eye towards certain information in a certain order. Cues, such as arrows, lines, and contrasting type, etc., can be crucial in making information easier to understand. Contrast draws the eye to an entry point, for example. Varying the degree of contrast can show movement from most to least important. Contrasting color can be used, selecting the something from its background. Or it can be used for creating hierarchy, as in monochromatic gradations of rainfall on a climate map. It can be used for grouping like content and for integrating connecting parts to the whole. There also can be a mental contrast in an unexplained juxtaposition or comparison. In this before example that I'm going to show you, there's no contrast in the way the type is handled, except maybe for the use of some uppercase. Pretty dull, boring, and vague. But watch what happens when we add contrast. Here's a visual cue, a simple arrow, to draw the eye to an entry point, and for added emphasis, it's in a color that contrasts with the background color. It helps the eye go there first. Here we see contrast in the darkness of the type to show that the information at the side is less important than the text in the middle. There's a contrast in weight of the headings to hint at how to chunk the coming information. Okay, back to the dull example. Let's see how alignment can help this design. The principle of alignment is based on visual momentum. The eye follows a path and creates for our brain the suggestion of a relationship. How you choose to align your elements can channel the viewer's attention in a particular way, altering the default top-down, left-to-right reading order. Alignment in this before design gives the eye barely any direction at all. In the new version, a horizontal plane adds interest and tops the presentation with the instructor's photo. The vertical alignment allows the sidebar list to be available at a glance, even as the viewer's eye is marshaled to the main entry point of the text. The vertical alignment of the sidebar further contrasts with the horizontal alignment of the contact information at bottom. Research tells us that the eye tracks on the page from upper left to upper right, looping through the middle, then down to lower left and off the lower right edge of the page. Eastern cultures, by the way, have a different default reading order, reading from bottom up, right to left. So the design advice here is to make sure to put the last information you want readers to see at the bottom right of the page. So many times, novice designers will leave this part of the page blank, the bottom right, missing an important opportunity to engage the eye and the brain of readers. Notice how the very last thing to meet the eye in this design is the website, where viewers can go for further details. In addition to alignment, the use of repetition and proximity are crucial organizing principles when designing effectively for instruction. Repetition evokes patterns in the information by repeating qualities such as color and shape among conceptually related objects. In our example, the small chunks of detail in the sidebar are repetitive in terms of size, heading, and text colors and shadings. So the viewer knows without actually reading the words that this information is about small segments of related material. Prior learning helps the viewer estimate that this information is probably referring to units of instruction within the course itself. Proximity employs distance to categorize certain data and exclude other data, making information easier to store and remember. Chunking creates hierarchy of meaning and answers the question, which is most important, next in importance, and least important for this particular context. The last letter in our mnemonic, reminding us of ways of organizing design for effective learning, is the letter E for extra white space. A lot of novice designers will tend to fill in uniformly the visible surface background in a design, sort of aiming for a wallpaper look, or what I call the bingo card effect. Designers of effective graphics for learning, however, know that white space can be a powerful design element on its own. At the very least, extra white space draws the eye and helps frame the most important elements on the page. Extra white space, by playing off of the degree of distance one expects between elements, helps create chunks and even shows relationship between chunks. Extra white space creates negative shapes that make a frame and that focus attention elsewhere. Extra white space can draw the eye and create motion or direction. Extra white space can build emotional context by virtue of its nothingness or the absent that it evokes. In our before example, the only extra white space we see is random. In our after example, the intentionally created white space above and below the main information creates a stage to frame the universal main explanation. The square or block of text thus framed works as a unifying shape that is repeated in the shape of the instructor's photograph and in the blue square in the body of the arrow element at top. The research about visuals and learning tells us that placement and relevance make a big difference. Cognitive load theory and information processing theory, along with Meyer's multimedia principles, all come into play. We know that individuals tend to remember images better than words, so it's a good idea to include pictures and graphics to help learners remember. In general, images especially can help learners who have low prior knowledge. But the temporal contiguity principle tells us that words and pictures, for best effect, must be processed in the brain simultaneously. This is how it works. The right hemisphere of the brain handles visual memory, and the left hemisphere tackles verbal memory. And these hemispheres work in tandem to select, organize, and integrate the input from learning materials into something meaningful. That is why we don't put a picture way off to the side, for example, because then the brain categorizes the picture as non-essential. And any non-essential media tends to split the attention, putting too much cognitive load onto learners. Basically, visuals should add some aspect to what the learner already understands and should have an obvious connection to the material. In our after example, the photo of the instructor is situated within the arrow that points to the main content, signaling that the message comes from the instructor, who is given an identifying caption with her name. In addition, the visual element of the golden bar relates to the course title and adds to learners' current understanding that such knowledge as can be found in the course is golden and valuable. So there you have it, the condensed basics about designing effective graphics for learning. Whether you're designing course materials, a flyer, a brochure, a syllabus, or an instruction manual, to avoid confusing the learner, your job is to point out what is important. Help organize these new ideas through sequence, hierarchy, or analogy, while activating prior connections in the brain. You now know that contrast, alignment, repetition, proximity, and extra space are your best friends when designing for learning. To take control of your graphic designs for learning, all you have to do is think CARPE Idiom to remember the 5 organizing principles: contrast, alignment, repetition, proximity, and extra space for framing. And you'll have the basic tools you need to organize plain gray information into the right elements for effective design for learning.